Otro video para ti hoy. Este es Ron con internetcomputers.com. Otro video para ti hoy. I'm making this video showing you how to install Linux Mint, but before I go ahead with the install, just a couple of quick caveats. I'm installing it on a Dell 530 Inspiron. You may need to go into the BIOS to get it to boot. You can create, this is Linux Mint 18.3. The XFCE version, right now there's 3 different distros that you can install. There's a Coffee, I think it's called Coffee, what is it now? There's 3 different ones, or 4 different ones. Cinnamon, Mate, XFCE, and also KDE. I chose XFCE because it's a lightweight version of Linux. You may need to go into the BIOS. On a Dell computer, you press F2 or whatever computer you're using, and then go into the boot device configuration. Make sure that the hard disk priority on older computers like Dell's, a USB flash drive will show up as a USB hard drive, as you can see on screen. Well, I'll just leave my hand there so it zooms. Come on, fucking zoom in. And then also make sure that removable is also enabled. You might want to choose that as the first device so that it'll, to make sure that the computer boots off of the flash drive. Now you can burn media to a DVD, a USB flash drive, and possibly they might have a live CD. I chose to create a bootable USB flash drive. It's faster than DVD, but I'm not the military, I'm not the government, I'm not your pastor, I'm not an authoritarian. So you choose what you want to do, right? Isn't that what happens when you demand you become free speech, and you get to choose what you want to do? So let's reboot. And then another thing you can do, if it doesn't automatically boot off of the flash drive or the DVD drive or the CD drive, you can always hit F12 on a Dell and it'll open up a special boot menu. Depends on what computer hardware you're using. The F key to get into there might be different. Dell, it's always F12. As you can see on screen, you would choose the second one, USB hard drive, and then it will attempt to boot off of the flash drive. And there we go. It's going to boot in a few seconds. We'll just leave it at that. I'm going to convert this Dell that was running Windows Vista Business 64-bit, that was just my file server, and I'm going to convert it into a firewall, a server, sharing files, and then also I'm going to share my internet connection. I installed a wireless card in it, and I'm going to share the internet connection on the wireless card to the rest of my network. So we'll make sure that if I put my hand in front of the camera, it focuses better. I don't know why that is. So there we are. Now I've used probably at least 10 distributions of Linux, and the reason why I'm installing Linux Mint, I've never used Linux Mint, but I've used Linux for at least 15 years, is I'm not happy with Ubuntu 17 and 16 and even 14 at times, although 14 gives me less problems. So I decided to try out Linux Mint. So you can test it out. A lot of times with Linux distributions, they have either a live CD or even on the DVD install or the USB install. You can test it first. As you can see, you can check out the internet. You can check out these applications. You can just test it out for a while and see if you like it, and then you can install it. Well, I don't need to do all that because I've used Linux for many years now. One recommendation is that you hook up to the internet first, because there could be some updates that Linux Mint wants to install, and so by you connecting an Ethernet cable preferably beforehand, then any updates that get installed while the operating system gets installed will also get downloaded, but you don't have to. Most times with these Linux distributions, you can install without an internet connection, unless you specifically create like a network-only install, but that's technical and I'm not going to get into that. So we're just going to double click on the install permanently to your hard drive, and we will start installing. You might want to make sure that you have the right language. I speak English and Español. Mi español es muy mal. Pinche bendejo errón. I just dissed myself in Spanish. So I'm going to click continue, but if English is not your forte, or if you want to install in another language, on the left-hand side you've got all these choices, 150, whatever. So I'm just going to choose continue. Now, there's preparing to install Linux Mint. Install third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi hardware, Flash, MP3, and other media. The software is subject to license terms included with this documentation. Some is proprietary. I almost always choose that, but it's up to you. It'll help you install like graphics drivers for Intel or AMD and some other software that might be proprietary. So you just be aware of that. Come on, zoom. Come on! Fucking piece of shit camera. Come on! Zoom! Jesus. So click continue. I'm not religious, and if you're offended by that, I don't care. I'm a former Christian, and I cannot stand Christianity. It makes me want to hurl thinking about going to church like I used to and believing that crap. And if you're offended by that, I don't give a fuck. That's my free speech. I have nothing against Christians or Jews that practice Judaism or even Muslims. I'm just not religious. Okay, installation type. This computer currently has Linux Mint 18.3 Sylvia. Okay, what would you like to do? Now, I never fuck with partitions. You do not need to learn Gparted. You don't need to mess with partitions to use Linux. So you can erase disk and install Linux Mint. Install Linux Mint alongside... I already installed this the first time just to make sure that my install media worked. You can, choose something else, which would be a customized version, or I'm not giving you the option, but the first time that you install this, or if I would have formatted my hard drive, it would allow you to encrypt. But caveat with encryption, if you forget the key, you're fucked. But you can encrypt the entire Linux installation. I'm just going to choose erase disk and install Linux Mint. I could encrypt it if I wanted to. I'm not going to do that. You could use a logical volume manager, but you need to know what these terms mean. So the easiest way to install most distributions of Linux I've ever used is the default, which is normally erase disk and install Linux Mint. You do not have to mess with partitions. You do not have to change the partition for the swap or none of that. It will do it all for you with default settings that are just fine. It warns you that it's going to destroy the data. Click continue. Where are you? It found my location. If yours is different, you could type in your city or whatever. Click continue. That's probably because I connected this computer to the internet. Your keyboard layout. I'm going to choose the default because that's what I'm going to use, English US. If you want to choose a different keyboard layout, look on the left-hand side. There's plenty of choices for your language of choice. I'm going to click continue. Now, it's going to ask you you do not have to enter a name if you do not want, but you can. Just whatever you want to put, your real name or your alias or whatever. Computer name, you probably have to put in a computer name. I just named it D530 for my network so I know which one this computer is. A username, I just put something generic. You can put whatever you want for a username. You have to enter a password. I'm just going to put in a easy password. You can change that later. You can even, with Linux, you can blank the password, but you cannot create an account without a password. Now, you can choose to log in automatically. I sell Linux computers once in a while. I take old computers that I recycle that do not have a Windows certificate of authenticity license key, and I would load Linux. And I also plan on starting and building my own Linux computers and then loading operating systems, different distributions, and then testing and then selling them as a service. I'm going to choose login automatically. When I sell computers, I choose login automatically, and I tell my customers the password. And they can change the password later, because I want it easy for my customers, but I do give them the password, but it's usually something generic. Then click continue. Then now it's going to take a little bit of time. It's copying files. Most Linux distributions I've ever installed, while it was installing the operating system, it would also download updates, some updates, or maybe newer versions of files that are newer than what's on the install media. So that's another reason why you might want to connect to the internet before you start your install. So copying files, it's not that difficult. You just accept the defaults, make sure the keyboard language is yours, make sure the language is what you speak or whatever, make sure the time, the city is correct for the time, the system time, locally. And you do not have to fuck with partitions if you don't want to. I don't recommend you do that if you're, a beginner. I've been using Linux for 15 years at least, and once or twice I fucked with partitions, and I found out it was an entire waste of my time, because I've never ran out of space, ever. When you change the partitions, you're just changing the 4 or 5 different main areas of Linux. You can change the swap, but Linux out of the box already creates a swap partition for you. You don't need to worry about that. I've never, I guess if you want to, but there's no reason for it. I'm happy with just the defaults. And with Linux, after the fact, you can change the partitions. If the user folder or the Etsy folder is too small, or you're not happy with the swap partition, you can change that after the fact. Configuring apt. Now down here you can see retrieving file. It's retrieving these files either off the USB flash drive or off the internet. So it retrieves these files and then it starts to install them. Configuring the time zone, configuring the keyboard, creating the user. And with some Linux distributions, they even tell you, or what you can do is you can go ahead and still use the test. You can still test out Linux while it's installing. So we can go out to the internet. I usually don't. 11 seconds remaining. Downloading language packs. That I would assume would be off the internet. But if you wanted to, you can check it out. And it works. Back in the day with slower computers, it would be very difficult to do that. But with newer hardware, and it depends on the distribution, you can actually test it out while it's installing. You know what I'm saying? Let me talk about a few things. You might have to go into the BIOS to make sure that you can boot off of your media, whether it's a CD ROM or a DVD or a flash drive. Just make sure that you can boot off of it. Or if there's a special boot menu, go into that and try to boot off of it. I would recommend that you create a flash drive because it's faster, but it's up to you. You can do whatever you want. DVD, CD, whatever. Flash drive, even Pixie Boot or TFT, but that's more technical. But it is possible to install Linux without a CD, a DVD, or a flash drive. Configuring hardware. So we're almost done here. A few more minutes. I'm using a Dell D530 Inspiron. It's just a dual core. It has 4 gigs of RAM. That should be enough. The hardware compatibility, I looked on linuxmint.com or .org. Most of their current distros, which are 18.3, I don't give a shit about nicknames like Sylvia. I just don't care that they nickname it Sylvia. I don't care about that crap. I know Apple does that. I just don't give a shit. I just remember operating systems by their number. 18.3, I think you need at least 1 gigahertz central processing unit, 1 gig of RAM, and like 15 or 20 gigs of disk space. That's it. But you might want to get something quicker. But if you have a spare computer laying around, a spare laptop, even I would say if it's a Pentium 4, I don't know about a original Pentium, you could try it. Over the years, even Linux is getting bloated, and a lot of it deals with the window manager. Now there's Mate. What are they now again? Linux Mint has 4 different ones. Cinnamon, I don't know if I've ever used that. Mate, XFCE, and KDE. I've used XFCE. I've used KDE. It's downloading more packages, I assume, from the internet. Now it's installing some more files. Cinnamon, Mate, I know KDE is very bloated. Even GNOME is bloated. XFCE is a lot more lightweight, but when I have used XFCE on other distributions, some of the system administration tasks were not available. So, that could be a problem. And then the hardware. On older hardware, it's going to be a lot slower to run Cinnamon and Mate and KDE. But over the years, even Linux is getting bloated. Let's go over which distributions I've used. I started off with, back in the day, it wasn't really Linux. It was a version of Unix, but let's not digress about that. Linux. I think probably Red Hat Linux. Back in the day, Red Hat Linux was free. Now that version is commercial, and they split it off to Fedora. I started using Fedora until I had problems with it. One version of Fedora fucked up my internet connection. I had to Google it and figure out what text files to edit, and then I ditched it, and then I started using Mandriva. Mandriva was limited, lack of software, lack of support. So I went back to Fedora, then further problems. Then I tried out CentOS. I've used CentOS, I think, 5, 6, and 7. CentOS, in my opinion, if you want a really stable operating system, CentOS, Slackware, and Debian. I've tried all 3. Debian and Slackware are much more difficult to install because you do not have this little graphical user interface to hold your hand. You have to fucking know what you're doing when you install Debian and Slackware. But CentOS does have a graphical user interface even during the install. But CentOS is not as nearly as bleeding edge. It's more stable. You could use that for servers, and you know what I'm saying? It's similar. It's based off of Enterprise Linux, which is Red Hat Linux. I've used SUSE. I think SUSE might have been the first one or the second. Actually, I think SUSE was the first. You can continue testing Linux. You can test the internet. You can go in and learn command line. You can go in and test out these apps and, play around, learn Linux, accessories, calculator. You can do all that. Or what we can do, And a lot of current contemporary Linux distributions have LibreOffice already pre-installed for you. They already have a web browser. A lot of times it's Firefox. They already have email for you. So with these, even back in the day, 15 years ago, a lot of the distros had software that were already installed. And you can remove these apps. All right, so we're just going to restart now. So I think it was Suzy maybe that I started off first. Then Fedora, well, no, probably either Red Hat Linux, which now split off to Enterprise Linux. Suzy, and then Fedora. Mandriva, CentOS. I've used Lubuntu. I've used Ubuntu. I ditched Ubuntu recently because too many problems with version 16 and 17. A few days ago, I downloaded and installed all the updates for Ubuntu 16.4. Well, it fucked up my local browsing ability. I was not able to browse any of my other computers on my local network. That was a deal breaker. I upgraded it to Ubuntu 17. Ubuntu 17 was okay, but I'm trying to think why I ditched. I just decided to try out Linux Mint because I was starting to have problems with Ubuntu. And also I was getting a lot of these errors. And then every time you get an error on Ubuntu, it wants to send in a report, and that was just annoying. And now you can turn that off. You can go into the command line and edit a file to turn it off, but I don't like those annoyances. And I need a distribution for my computer repair business because I use Linux to recover data, because I found out that Linux will automatically mount Macintosh hard drives, HFS file system, and also NTFS file system on Windows operating systems. So that can save me a lot of time. And I actually have better luck using Linux to recover data. So now I'm trying Linux Mint. What else have I? Oh, Kali Linux. Kali Linux is more for the H word. You know what I'm saying? It's for learning how to. It's for security. Becoming a, if you use the H word, you get your video flagged as violating community guidelines. Oh, you know what? I have to unhook the USB flash drive. Okay. We're almost done here. Kali Linux is for security. If you want to learn security and how to circumvent security, or just you want to learn how to learn security with Linux, check out Kali Linux. It has a lot more tools, that are slanted towards security. You can port scan and all that stuff. Any other versions of Linux? I think that's probably about it. Somewhere around 10. This is the first time I've ever used Linux Mint. It's based off of Ubuntu. So Linux, there can be a learning curve when you first start using it. I've used Ubuntu. I've used Debian. It's not going to be that much different. Apt get update, apt get dist upgrade, blah, 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 blah. So that shouldn't be a problem. Okay, I guess it's still booting into the operating system, I think. Let's see. Yeah, it is. There's the arrow. So that's all. There it is. We're done. Now, I recommend that once you install Linux, that you just test it out real quick. Make sure, it runs decent for you. We can go out the internet, test the internet real quick. Just try it out. It's a new computer. Well, it's a different operating system. You took a spare computer or whatever, and, you don't have any important data on it, so just whatever. We can just test out the search. Let's see, Fedora. Linux. I just want to test the internet. Because I've learned over the years that Linux is not perfect. And some distributions are bleeding edge, and then all of a sudden you find out that you upgrade and you can't fucking even get on the internet without editing the etc resolve.configuration file. So the internet works, and the welcome screen. Now, I'm going to convert this into a server, a file server using Samba. I'm going to share my wireless card. And then I'm going to have a firewall, and it's going to route packets so that I can share the same wireless connection, same wireless internet connection for my entire office. And then that way I will free up. I was using a Dell as my internet gateway, and I'm going to free that up by converting this into multitasking. And it's going to run Linux Mint, because I've heard really good things about Linux Mint for a few years now. But Linux is not perfect. I've never ran into one distribution that was perfect. You know what I'm saying? But I've just had too many problems with Ubuntu recently. So what I want to make sure is that... Oh, drivers, you got to make sure that you have the... You might want to make sure you've got the correct drivers for your video card before you proceed. I'm not going to go too much anymore. I'm just, testing it out just to see how it reacts. If it was really slow, it took forever to open up Firefox, I'd be hesitant on using this. Okay, do not upgrade I can upgrade the CPU microcode. I will do that later. But for now, I'm not going to bore you with that. But just, you might want to go into the drivers and see if there's any updates. What else can you do? Now, what I'm going to do is I need to make sure that my Wi-Fi adapter was detected. There should be a systems area, settings, appearance. There should be a networking. There it is, network connections. Most Linux distributions use Network Manager now. I'm not a big fan of that. Network Manager in the recent years has turned into a nightmare, so that could be a problem. However, I'm still going, there's wired connection. Where is my wireless router? It should have detected it. You know what I'm saying? I might have to go through this later and make a separate video. I don't see it here. It only shows 2 wired connections. I have 2 Ethernet cards on this computer. It's older. It only had a built-in 100 megabyte, so I added a 1 gigabyte network card. Doesn't look like it found the Wi-Fi card, but let's see. I'm going to run after this. Is there like some kind of let's see, window manager. So I'm running XFCE, which is a lot more lightweight. If I would have installed Mate, whatever, Cinnamon, KDE, who knows? This could be so slow that I wouldn't even use it anymore. I don't know. That's one of the disappointments I've had with Linux, is it's become bloated just like Macintosh operating systems and just like Windows operating systems. Too much bloatware. Let's see if is there a Wi-Fi. Looks like I'm gonna have to sort that out later. Panel. Settings manager. This is like control panel in Windows or on Macintosh, the Apple menu, or wherever the fuck, whatever. Okay, let's see. Driver manager, firewall, login. If you're new to Linux, just go in here and check these out. It's a new installation. If you fuck something up, you can always re-image it, or you can learn how to fix your changes. You know what I'm saying? That's how I learned Linux. I just learned how to create the media. I learned how to install it, and I learned how to use it by just going in here and, learn and checking things out. I want to go into Wi-Fi settings, File Manager, Desktop Settings Panel, Window Manager, Preferred, Power Manager. So on some Linux distributions, there's 2 different network menus. I don't see even anything for network here. Well, I'll have to figure that out. But I'm very happy. I'm pleased right now. This is speedy. I mean, it's a dual core, 4 gigs of RAM, and it reacts very well. You know what I'm saying? It could be because I'm using XFCE, but this will work out well. I can already tell. What's this? You know what I'm saying? So I'm going to make another video. I just want to make this video showing you my installation of Linux Mint 18.3, the XFCE version with XFCE Window Manager on a Dell dual core D530 or 530 Inspiron with 4 gigs of RAM. My next video's about Linux Mint. I've got another project. Before I leave, I tried to use Rufus to create the installation media for the flash drive. It did not work. I found, we can even browse the internet here on this computer I just imaged. Let's see, we can go to linuxmint.com and I'll show you this tool that created the flash drive correctly. It was documentation, and then you see how quick, I mean, the internet is, you know, just as quick as any of my other computers. And I don't even have blazing fast internet. I think right here, create bootable media. I had to use this tool in Windows, Mac OS, or other Linux distributions. Download Etcher. I prefer Rufus because it's a portable, but when I burned with it, it wouldn't boot off the flash drive. So I was like, what the fuck? So I was like, well, maybe there's something to it. Etcher, I don't know if there's a portable version. I'll check it out. I'm not endorsing it because I've only used it once, but it did create my bootable flash drive that was bootable. So Etcher. Maybe if you have problems creating a flash drive, use Etcher because that's what they recommended. And it's real easy. You just select the ISO file, you select the drive, and then you just flash it, which means create the media. And it worked. And they show you how to make a bootable DVD, blah, 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 blah. Linux Mint 19. Excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. Yeah, I think they are working on Linux Mint 19. Linux Mint 18.3. Adios.